Section 2 of Abraham Lincoln the Practical Mystic by Francis Grierson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Logic of the Supernatural. Judge Henry C. Whitney has asked the following questions. By what magic spell was this, the greatest moral transformation in all profane history wrought? What genius sought out this roving child of the forest, this obscure flatboatman, and placed him on the lonely heights of immortal fame? Why was this best of men made the chief propitiation for our national sins? Was his progress causative or fortuitous? Was it logical or supernatural? Was the unseen power, or he himself, the architect of his fortune? The blunders that were committed by raw and reckless commanders in the field were sufficient to make angels weep, but they were all mosaics in the process of fate to work out the divine plan. If we could see the whole scheme of human redemption, it would be quite clear to us that not only Abraham Lincoln, U.S. Grant, W.T. Sherman, but equally Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and Raphael Semmes were necessary instruments of the great disposer of events. That the bullet which terminated the glorious career of the President was not more surely sped by fate to its mark than was the bullet which ended the life of Albert Sidney Johnston at Shiloh, and which ultimately averted ruin to the Union forces on that blood-stained field, and that in the sublime procession of destiny all events, apparent accidents, calamities, crimes, and blunders were agents of the omnipotent will, now as cause, then as interlude or eddy, anon as effort, all working, apparently, and to human comprehension fortuitously, but in reality all harmoniously to their divine appointed end. The mystical mood. There was to me, says Henry B. Rankin in his Personal Recollections of Abraham Lincoln, always an unapproachable grandeur in the man when he was in this mood of inner solitude. It isolated and, I always thought, exalted him above his ordinary life. History will discern and reverently disclose the strength in Lincoln's character and the executive foresight for which this mood gave him revealings. And the Reverend Joseph Fort Newton adds to the sentiments of his friend Rankin these words: Lincoln was a man whom to know was a kind of religion. His deep musings on the ways of God, on the souls of men, on the principles of justice and the laws of liberty, bore fruit in exalted character and exact insight. Hence a style of speech remarkable for its lucidity, direction, and forthright power, with no waste of words, tinged always by a temperament at once elusive and alluring, which Bryce compares to the weighty eloquence of Cromwell without its haziness. Going into the silence. During an important criminal trial, M.C. McWilliams said, "Lincoln will pitch in heavy now, for he has hid." One who knew him declared, "He seemed never alone. I have frequently seen him in the midst of a court in session, with his mind completely withdrawn from the busy scene before his eyes, as completely abstracted as if he were in absolute solitude." Judge Whitney wrote, "In religion Lincoln was in essence a mystic, and all his adoration was in accordance with the tenets of that order, a judgment which agrees with that of Alexander H. Stephens, Vice President of the Southern Confederacy. With Lincoln the Union rose to the sublimity of a religious mysticism." The mystical mood cannot be likened to any other mood. People in a hurry never experience such a mental state. Personal ambition forbids it, and the feeling of vainglory renders such a condition impossible. What renders the life of Lincoln so instructive is the fact that with him everything was so natural. He did not experiment. He did not practice special hours and seasons. He had no fixed times for this or that. He professed no subtle methods of inducing moods and took no stimulants. Nature and a mystical providence arranged and provided. His moods were between himself and his God. No one ever dared approach him as to the why or the wherefore of his silence. And it is proper here to comment on the instinctive good sense of the American people in whose midst Lincoln passed his whole life. They instinctively knew too much to presume upon the privacy of his mystical moods. In this their attitude was wholly admirable. The American people were at the time practical democratic seers, without whom the greatest practical mystic could not have existed. That Lincoln possessed intuition and illumination without resorting to human aid is clear and irrefutable. His words were simple and his actions were simple, like those of the Hebrew seers. He announced and he pronounced without subtle explanations or mysterious formulas, all which proves that practical mysticism can nourish as much under a democracy as under any other form of government. Men do not receive their gifts from those in power. They come into the world with them. Lincoln was opposed on all sides from the start. He had to contend with poverty, provincial ignorance, aristocratic prejudice, academical opposition, and he had against him his homely features, his awkward bearing, and the lack of influential patronage. He had no family connections that could be of assistance anywhere at any time. Never had there been a man of great intellect so absolutely alone in the intellectual world, so removed from social and political favors of time and circumstance. Invisible powers. We are compelled to look at all sides of Lincoln's political career in order to arrive at a just appreciation of his stupendous achievements. And when that is done, we have to dismiss the notion that he succeeded because of his brilliant intellectual gifts. Others possessed great intellects without attaining altitudes of commanding power and enduring fame. Why did the influence of Caesar, Darius, Alexander, Bonaparte, and Bismarck cease as soon as they passed away? Because the influence they exerted was based on material dominion. With the collapse of the material, everything collapses. The material can never go beyond or take precedence of the spiritual. Marcus Aurelius is read today because he placed spiritual things above all worldly possessions and privileges. The universe was created by a supreme mind, and the direction of affairs is in the hands of this all-seeing power, manifesting in all forms, sometimes personal, sometimes collective. In Lincoln's case, it took a pronounced individual form, isolated and unique, as in Moses. The ease with which Lincoln overcame opposition amazed those who were near him. They judged it miraculous. Miracles are manifestations for which science has no definition, no analysis. Lincoln's intelligence was not bound by the known rules and laws of science. It requires intuition and illumination for its realization. Such intelligence cannot be handled in detail as chemists handle the elements of matter. In the mystical world, all the elements, forces, and combinations act and develop together as one manifestation at one time. No mental chemistry can separate them. The fusion of spirit and matter. The existence of a great man, says Victor Cousin, the French philosopher, is not the creation of arbitrary choice. He is not a thing that may or may not exist. He is not merely an individual. Too much or too little of individuality are equally destructive to the character of a great man. On the one hand, individuality of itself is an element of what is pitiful and little, because particularity, the contingent and the finite, tends unceasingly to division, to dissolution, and to nothingness. On the other hand, every general tends to absolute unity. It possesses greatness, but it is exposed to the risk of losing itself in abstractions. The great man is the harmonious combination of what is particular with what is general. This combination constitutes the standard value of his greatness, and it involves a twofold condition. First, of representing the general spirit of his nation, because it is in his relation to that general spirit that his greatness consists, and secondly, of representing the general spirit which confers upon his greatness in his own person in a real form, that is, in a finite, positive, visible, and determinate form, so that what is general may not suppress what is particular, and which is particular may not dissipate and dissolve what is general, that the infinite and the finite may be blended together in that proportion which truly constitutes human greatness, all of which applies to Lincoln. "Conceive a great machine," wrote Guizot, the historian. the design of which is centered in a single mind, though its various parts are entrusted to various workmen, separated from and strangers to each other. No one of them understands the work as a whole, nor the general result which he concerts in producing, but every one executes with intelligence and freedom, by rational and voluntary acts, the particular task assigned to him. It is thus by the hand of man the designs of Providence are wrought out in the government of the world. It is thus that the two great facts which are apparent in the history of civilization come to coexist. On the one hand, those portions of it which may be considered as fated, or which happen without the control of human knowledge or will; on the other hand, the part played in it by the freedom and intelligence of man, and what he contributes to it by means of his own knowledge and will. His miraculous progress. One of the most searching biographers of Lincoln maintains that between the ages of 14 and 28 he displayed no sign of embryonic or assured greatness. If this be true, it means that none of Lincoln's early friends were intuitive enough to discover his greatness. Even the best writers who have dealt with this fascinating subject have failed to see all the facts, all the influences, all the correlated powers, in connection with what looks to many like a life of miracle. Intelligence and power are not attained by any mental hocus-pocus or metaphysics. Diamonds in the rough are still diamonds, or no one would think of having them polished. The same laws work in nature as in human nature. The great man is born, but he is not born with all his faculties developed, and he, like others, must pass through stages of progressive development. There is not one law for genius and another for mere talent. A distinguished writer says, "Lincoln achieved greatness, but can the genesis of the mystery be analyzed? Certainly not by the ordinary process of ordinary philosophers and scientists. What all writers up to the present have failed to see is that Lincoln's powers were a combination of the normal practical and the practical supernatural. His supernaturalism was positive, mathematical, and absolute. The only things which Lincoln had to learn as he went were the modes of application. He had to learn system and method, as was natural, but the principle came into the world with him. Everything that is concrete appears simple. The various qualities and elements that produce what we call mental illumination are hidden from the crowd, and even from those who most profess to understand. Jesse Dubois wrote to Judge Whitney that, after having been intimately associated with Lincoln for 25 years, I now find that I never knew him. The great man had unconsciously deceived his friends because of his outward simplicity, and this outward freedom was backed by his simplicity of speech and direct logic. It was all too simple. They were fooled by the outward material because the inward mystical took that form. His friends liked the man and worked to elect him principally for that reason, and this is why they were astonished later on, when the practical mystic rose clear above all systems of politics and all the accepted philosophies and accomplished the miraculous. The impossible happened. The president had to go more than halfway through the Civil War before the real Lincoln became manifest to observing critics. End of section 2.